Like, I love David Njoku this year. It's such a simple ask where we want tight ends who are the number 1 or number 2 target on their team. It would be shocking if Njoku was not a number 1 or number 2 target. And like you said, if it's Flacco, we have a history and a sample size of Flacco hyper-targeting Njoku and Njoku having big-time production alongside him. So, like, I love Njoku. Every year he seems like a value to me. And when we talk about tight ends in terms of targets, David Njoku on like a per game basis is top 3 or top 4 over the last 2 years combined. So
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
can zero RB strategy work in 2025? Theo Greminger for Fantasy Football Daily over here on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. Joined today by Davis Mattek. This is always a hot button issue, one that I enjoy discussing. I'm a player who's built some zero RB teams that were just nasty over the years. Occasionally you build a zero RB team and it sort of falls apart. But this feels like the return of zero RB this year, Davis. It seems like a perfect atmosphere. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you. Again, joined by Davis Mattek, repeat guest. We're actually back-to-back ship chasers here on Fantasy Football Daily. I had Pete Overzet in last week. That was a really fun one. Make sure you check it out. We talked about some ADP risers. Now, Davis, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to talk draft strategy. So how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Very near and dear to my heart, the topic of zero running back. So very excited to get into the nuts and bolts of the strategy this year, because I don't think it's super straightforward actually in 2025.
Yeah, and I'll say in 2025, I feel like any strategy can sort of work because we see balance in the round 1 and round 2 with the strength of multiple positions. Like just that we'll dive into a little bit later on the show, but there's wide receivers I really like in round 2. There's wide receivers I really like in round 1. There's running backs I really like in round 2. And there's obviously some running backs I really liked in round 1. Why do you think zero RB is such a hot button issue for people? This is anytime I put a zero RB podcast on, there's immediately people who jump into the YouTube streets and sort of just immediately bash it. But over the years, you've seen some huge hits. A couple years back, the NFFC had 2 teams that were zero RB that won championship within the same year. It was the Silver Bullet and the NFFC Classic. I believe that drafter didn't draft a running back before like round 6 or round 7. So you're talking about in that format, which is obviously wide receiver heavy, they were able to thread the needle. We've seen in FFPC main events, some teams have done well. Usually the overall winner, though, has been a hero RB build or something along those lines. So shout out to the Go Bills guys. They've never been zero RB in their strategy. They won it back-to-back years, but they did use hero RB, which has a lot of the same benefits of zero RB, which we'll touch on hero RB, another show for the hero RB truthers out there. But why do you think this is immediately dismissed by so many drafters?
I mean, the reason why it's immediately dismissed is because it has the word zero in it, right? I mean, that's a simple. And then also, if you just sort of think about most people's experiences with fantasy football, the best years they've had in fantasy, the true legendary seasons, people, they are thinking Marshall Faulk, LaDainian Tomlinson, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley last year. And it's just hard to imagine having a fantasy team that wins $250,000, $500,000, $1 million without one of those guys, even though, we have evidence that it's pretty easily doable. And then the other thing is that zero RB embraces chaos. It embraces not knowing. It embraces, well, I don't know what's going to happen this upcoming year in fantasy football. And that's not very fun. It's not very fun to go into a draft and be like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just going to try and organize a team that can take advantage of chaos if it falls a specific way.
Yeah, it's sort of a contrarian view from the beginning, where you're saying that the value is not going to lie in the heavily drafted running backs inside of round 1, that instead we're sort of going to build our strength where sort of other people are not looking, which is the wide receiver position. What's funny, Davis, is we saw like a complete 180 where a few years ago there were like 9 wide receivers going inside of round 1 at one point. when you're talking about FFPC, some of these other high stakes formats, where a couple years back it was like a sort of seemed like the wide receiver enthusiasts were very much winning. Hero RB or zero RB was trying to be executed. It seems like last year was sort of the big reset. Last year has sort of reset it where people don't want to miss on running back again. The environment last year was unbelievable. No one got hurt, and all of the old guys scored. The AJ Pex went completely out the window. You had Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry just scoring absurd levels, and all of the running backs that were younger completely broke out. Like, we saw every single one of those year two backs take their game to the next level. Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, all of those guys hit big. So I don't know. For me, it feels like this is the year that the chaos could potentially return. Year of the wide receiver, if you want to call it. And there's just so many of them. So your thoughts on sort of is last year going to get people in trouble?
So ADP actually is not swung near as much as I would have expected. A little bit more on FFPC than it has on Underdog and on DraftKings in terms of the best ball stuff. Like, people do still really want, I mean, we have the wide receiver 30 going in the 5th round of drafts, which just like never, when I started this, where do you think the wide receiver 30 was going in like 2016? 7th, 8th round, maybe. Yeah. We had 24 running backs gone by then. But it's more of a overall meta as it pertains to the NFL. Like, if we come back and all these quarterbacks and the offensive coordinators spent all offseason trying to find a way to beat the shell coverage, the 2 high safeties, and they got nothing. If the Chiefs suck on offense again, if the Bills are content to play 6 offensive linemen and just win every game, just running the ball down people's throats, the Eagles are totally unstopped. They're tush pushing their way. Like, that is the subtext of all of this, is that not only was last year, really only Zach Moss and Isaiah Pacheco were injured of the top 100 drafted running backs, and then all these wide receivers got hurt. But we also went from 49.5 points per game in 2020 and 2021 to 43.5 points per game. It was the first time in, I want to say, I think the number is 26 years, that running plays were positive EPA per play. If that happens again, guess what? You're just going to want to have running backs again. You're going to want to start running back in your flex every week, Yeah,
it's very interesting. And I will say, like, that can sort of get us in trouble a little bit because NFL defenses adjust year to year. We've seen it time and time again where something really, really works and then it shifts. Like, what these defensive coordinators are able to do year in, year out, in terms of, like, when you have an entire offseason to scout what the other teams are doing, see what worked for across the NFL, what can I do to sort of take these things away? That matters. And I think that when we go into it, could it be running backs again completely dominate at the top? Absolutely. But at the same time, I'm open-minded to this strategy in this year. Jamar Chase, of course, is my 101 in all formats. So at the very top, I'm sort of a running back at the top. I mean, a wide receiver at the top guy when it comes to my rankings. So it's sort of like leaning into the strength. Before we kind of dive into the particulars of zero RB, there's many different definitions of zero RB. How would you define it? Is it like something, it's like kind of like art, where some people say it means you don't take a running back until this round. Some people will say it means that I need to fill my flex before any running back spot. And some people are sort of like, I'm just going to attack each and every edge in every single round. Sort of what would be like, if you had to define it for Wikipedia, what is zero RB?
I think it's totally the Clarence Thomas. I know it when I see it. I'll tell you the biggest difference for how I view zero RB versus how, like, the newer generation of fantasy people seem to understand it is it's all about winning where you can. So I think a lot of times a true zero running back build should have an elite quarterback. It should have an elite tight end or both, right? So it should have Josh Allen and Sam Laporta. It should have Jaden Daniels and Brock Bowers. And it also, I mean, the way Sean Siegel always tried to describe it was you go into your draft attempting to get 6 of the top 15 points per game scorers at the wide receiver position, and that is how those become super teams. But, I don't think taking Breece Hall in the third round means it's not quote unquote a true, then it becomes more of a hero running back build. But, or if you really want, I suppose if you really want a definition, it would be, not probably for me, not taking running back till round 7, I guess would kind of be how I would define it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting way. I think that you've seen some variations of this, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but you've seen some variations of this where people end up diving into the dead zone. I consider that sort of upside down drafting. The whole, I'll draft 3 wide receivers and then I'll follow up with a running back in like rounds 4 and rounds 5. In years past, that sort of crushed teams, but the dead zone's actually been paying off a little bit better. Again, we'll dive into the dead zone in a whole another episode. Is there a dead zone? Is there a wide receiver dead zone? That's a whole nother podcast. But the dead zone's actually been producing some guys who really, really hit. So the upside down strategy can work a little bit. But I kind of agree with you. And shout out to Sean Siegel. He's very synonymous with zero RB strategy. He's been here on Fantasy Football Daily. But Sean will always talk about sort of winning the flex. And it's interesting that you talk about getting 6 of the top 50 wide receivers. I think that's another misunderstood tenet of zero RB. It's not just that I'm trying to get, like in some formats, 3 wide receivers and a wide receiver in the flex, or in some formats, 2 wide receivers and then maybe 2 high-end wide receivers in the 2 flex spots like FFPC. You need that depth to fully execute it. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Like the need for wide receiver depth inside and out of your roster.
Well, wide receivers get hurt. Wide receivers bust. You get hits at the wide receiver position in the same way that you get hits, otherwise. Like lots of guys at the wide receiver position, it's kind of funny how it's organized. There are quite often guys we think are really talented, but they're buried because, the team's not going to throw enough passes, or he's behind this guy. The example in my mind right now is Josh Downs. Like, if the Colts would have re-signed Joe Flacco and not drafted Tyler Warren, Downs would be what? 6th round pick ish, probably something like that. Maybe a 5th round pick. We can get him right now in the 8th, the 9th round because of just a lot of concerns. But basically, your wide receivers are going to get hurt. Some of your picks are going to bust. Like, Tyreek Hill's your 3rd round pick, just super bust or injured or whatever. And a zero running back team is never going to win without the the story of the season wide receivers. Like, you're going to need to have the number 1 overall wide receiver. You're going to need to have a guy who has like multiple 30-point games. Like last year, like Jamar Chase, Brian Thomas Jr. Combination, like zero running back, it just really wouldn't have worked last year. It would have been very hard, but you would have needed, those guys and T Higgins. Like you just have to piece it together so perfectly. So like just stopping at 5 wide receivers on a zero running back team is tough because you got to give yourself more outs.
Yeah, I think more outs is the operative word. It's having a chance like to really have that extreme wide receiver production, and you have to do that with volume. It's also like being able to dive into, there's always like the last draftable wide receiver argument, like the last wide receiver of comfort. This argument comes with best ball drafters. Like, what's the last sort of wide receiver that's not really a dart throw? Being able to identify these tiers and being able to dive into wide receivers who ideally are number 1 options on their team, having a number of those guys. And if it's a number 2 option on their team, it better be a high-powered pass attack. You reference a guy like a T Higgins, a Devontae Adams, those sort of wide receiver 2s. I think the other sort of wide receivers that zero RB enthusiasts want to go after are just those really talented guys that might be a little bit of contingent value plays, really young guys with draft capital, sort of like an Emeka Egbuka, a Luther Burden would sort of fall into this. We saw Garrett Wilson produce big returns his rookie season, sort of being drafted inside that range. So yeah, I love talking about the wide receiver strategy. Davis, you're recording all the time. You're recording on your own channel right after this. You're on Ship Chasing. Let everybody know sort of your weekly content at this time of year and what else you have going on in June and July.
Yeah, basically there will be either a posted video or a live stream on my YouTube channel every day of the week, 7 days a week for the rest of the summer. I've got rankings, seasonal rankings, best ball rankings up at patreon.com/DavisGuy. Davis Mattek with post, strategy style posts, thinking about fantasy football style posts at least once a week up on patreon.com/Davis Mattek, and ship chasing every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, highly recommend you going and checking out Davis's work. He's also drafting a lot. Really, really accurate in terms of your ADP info. I'll say that's like sort of a pet peeve for mine. I try to listen to a lot of podcasts. Whenever I hear somebody reference incorrect ADP, it's off, Davis. It's off for me. With your stuff,
Yes.
it's really, really annoying since we're in this information age and you can get accurate ADP info like the morning of. So I'll give a shout out today. I'm going to pull some FFPC ADP off of Fantasy Mojo. Shout out to Darren Armani. That's a site that's great. But simply just downloading the Underdog app onto your phone and looking at Underdog app, the Underdog ADP, that can help a lot. There's so many ADP sources out there. So let's get back into it. We talked a little bit about the wide receiver strategy. We sort of defined it as loosely wide receiver depth, continuing to attack the trying to have a unbelievably strong flex, and also having multiple wide receivers who can hit as wide receiver ones. You briefly mentioned the need for big-time tight end and quarterback production. This is also something that I think people misunderstand when it's a zero RB strategy. When it's zero RB, and I'm not necessarily going to get access to guys who are going to give me top 5 to top 10 running back production, just by definition, it's going to be harder for me to find that level of running back production when I'm ignoring the position for so long. Having an edge at tight end and quarterback really, really is a big deal. So let me ask you this. When you're attempting a zero RB build, are you more likely to go after the quarterbacks, like the true elite ones towards the top, the Jaden Daniels, the Josh Allen, the Jalen Hurts, sort of the top 5 guys, Lamar Jackson, of course? Or are you trying to find an upside edge pick so you can keep attacking wide receiver and tight end?
I'm a little bit less hip to the elite quarterbacks this year because they are quite expensive, right?
Yes.
I think the Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Lamar Jackson are like really expensive. Hurts, generally speaking, you can get him a little bit cheaper, and I like his, of the 4 of those guys, I have drafted Hurts the most often. But the most appealing elite onesie guys there are Bowers, Kittle, McBride, and I like actually TJ Hockenson. For me, I have in the same tier as Laporte. He's not really drafted that way on either Underdog or FFPC, but I think I think he's being a little bit undervalued. But yeah, and I've done quite a number of builds, just trying things out where you do both, and like your first running back is like Tony Pollard or Isaiah Pacheco or whatever, and you can backfill those kind of nicely, particularly, by the way, drafting early. This will be a little bit different if you're drafting teams, in the main event on August 30th. But right now, with the ambiguous backfield type stuff, you can at least tell yourself a story. Oh, I just drafted the Cowboys starting running back. I just drafted the Jaguars starting running back. Like there are ambiguous situations to take advantage of now that will not be there in honestly probably even like a month.
So just getting back to quarterback, I like the Jalen Hurts call, and he's a guy that really has like no buzz right now. He sort of is drafted where he's drafted. There's very few people saying like Jalen Hurts could be the league winner, but he's going this year at like an FFPC. He's a 4-5 turn guy. He's going alongside Joe Burrow, and he's going about a round behind the other big time quarterbacks. In terms of rushing production, it's a given you're going to get fantasy scoring from Jalen Hurts through his legs. The tush push is here to stay. And this is a guy that on a per game basis is like top 3 all time in NFL history in rushing yards per game at the quarterback position. So I like hearing a guest on Jalen Hurts. Just curious, do you also enjoy drafting Joe Burrow this year? Burrow's interesting because the top 4 quarterbacks all have rushing upside that Joe Burrow doesn't have. But it seems like the offensive environment is there for Burrow to deliver us a peak Peyton Manning like 50 passing touchdown season. He's got all the weapons in the world, a defense that's going to concede points, and a division that is sort of become shootout friendly. Where are you at with Burrow? Is he an edge pick for you in the same sense as Hurts?
Yeah, he just isn't, right? I mean, it's like not that Joe Burrow can't be the guy you needed in fantasy football, not that Joe Burrow can't win MVP. Like he can do all those things, but if you're just if you're playing the percentages, you're thinking about how fantasy points are generated, what are the most sustainable and repeatable performances. It's either guys who run or guys who sustain MVP level production. And what you'll find, and JJ, our friend JJ Zacharyson over at Late Round, I mean, he's done the best research on this, but the killer stat is basically like no quarterback who has I think the exact stat is no quarterback who's generated a top 5 fantasy finish based on a touchdown rate north of 6 has repeated it the next year. And I might be mangling JJ's research just a smidge, but it is that 6% number that's really big. And if you look at Joe Burrow's career, Joe Burrow's touchdown rate last year was abnormal. It was much higher than his actual career rate. His touchdown rate last year, highest of his career, 6.6%, even higher than the 2021 season, even higher than his 2022 season. And his career rate's 5.5%. Sounds like nothing, like just like talking, you're like, oh, 6.5% to 5.5%. I mean, that will end up being the difference of like 40 fantasy points, 50 fantasy points over the course of a season.
Let's get back to quarterback and let's try to look at a couple of potential other targets if we're attempting this build to find upside at the quarterback position without investing in like the top 4 quarterbacks. I'll just throw out a few ADPs. Let me know which one you kind of like the most. This is FFPC $350 redraft ADPs. Bo Nix is sort of slid a little bit. He's QB8, but you're getting him inside around 10 a lot more these days. Kyler Murray's supposed to run a little bit more. QB9, you're getting him at around the mid-10th round. Justin Fields, always an interesting one because of his rushing upside at the beginning of round 11. And then Caleb Williams going inside of round 12 consistently. Do any of those 4 guys, and I'll throw out the sort of later option, we'll kind of ignore Dak and Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield for that matter. I think they're sort of, we know what they are. I think that they're guys that can finish as QB1s, but don't necessarily have the top 3 QB upside. Drake May, though, is interesting. He's going inside of mid-round 13, and he does have that big-time rushing upside to his profile. He's also extremely young, has a lot of room to run, some unknown upside with May. Of all the quarterbacks I mentioned, which one of those guys or guys stand out to you the most?
I mean, Fields, I think, is the most obvious one that, like, oh, we get to the end of the year. Justin Fields scored 21.5 points per game. The Jets win 9 games, but they're like pretty scrappy. Fields had 3 games where he ran for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns. Garrett Wilson is not like throwing temper tantrums on the sideline. I think that one's pretty obvious. I'm actually done telling myself the story that Kyler is going to like run more. I think Kyler's being drafted fine, but like what Kyler is 28, I think 29. I mean, so it's just like, I think Kyler just pretty much is who he is. He's like the 13th best quarterback in the NFL. He and the Drew Petzing offense, it's just going to suffer when they get behind in games. They just need to, Kyler needs to be playing on a balanced team. The Drew Petzing's offense needs to be in a balanced game script to work. You want to know my answer for who is this year's guy who's way overdrafted next year based on an unsustainable touchdown rate? It's Purdy. I think Purdy once in his career will have like a 42 passing touchdown season because he's pretty good. Shanahan's an amazing play caller. Kind of depends on like, well, how good is Jennings really? How good is Pearsall really? Is Ayuk back in week 4 or is he back in week 8? How healthy does McCaffrey stay? Kittle's 31. Is this Kittle's black marble season? But I think Purdy across all formats is like dynasty redraft. I think Purdy's like literally like my most rostered quarterback. He just seems so obvious to me.
Yeah, it's interesting in dynasty drafts. He's got the contract insulation now, but it didn't really like do anything to steam him up. So I do think he's very, very interesting. It's been so efficient as a passer, and he's got like 2 QB1 finishes back-to-back seasons. I think it was QB6 in points per game and like the QB 10 or 11 in points per game in consecutive years. So this is a guy that's been finishing as that sort of a scorer. Interesting to see you on Purdy. Let's get back over to tight end, though. Hockenson, I really like the call because Hockenson's a guy where it's sort of a post-hype sleeper. Everybody remembers a few years back in like FFPC main events, Hockenson was the kind of guy you had to use like a 2-3 turn pick on. Was a finish. Does not have a tight end 1 finish in his career, but I believe he has a tight end 2 overall finish One of those first seasons between Detroit and Minnesota, he was just phenomenal on a points per game basis. You're getting him at the 5-6 turn in these FFPC drafts. So really, really interesting. You're getting him a significant discount from Sam Laporta, who's the tight end 4. Let's say you miss on Hockenson, though, and you still need to recover at tight end. Who would be a tight end that you think could sort of outbeat his ADP, give you an edge? This year's a little weird. Even in the tight end premium streets of FFPC, a lot of these low-end tight end ones are starting to go in the end of round 6 into round 7. Guys like Evan Engram, David Njoku, Mark Andrews, Jonnu Smith, Tyler Warren, Tucker Kraft, Dalton Kincaid, Colston Loveland, and how could we not mention Travis Kelce, who's going at the 6-7 right now? Do any of those tight ends jump out at you? Or are you saying, really, if I'm going to attempt 0, I want to try to get one of those top 4 in your mind tight ends?
You know what's funny is I think Kelce is just like pretty good to like, he'll be fine. He'll probably catch 82 passes, about 832 yards. If he scores 11 touchdowns, super sick. You're going to love to have had him. If he scores 4 touchdowns, you're just going to be like, man, really wish I would have taken someone else instead. I've really honed in on 2 guys as like the potential stories of the season at tight end. Tyler Warren and Tucker Kraft, which is funny because I started out being like, I'm not drafting Tyler Warren. I have no interest. But now that it became clear that Richardson is just clear to me that Richardson is just not going to play this year. In fact, I think it's more likely, honestly, that Richardson never plays for the Colts again than starts I guess maybe Daniel Jones gets injured, or maybe Daniel Jones just plays so bad. But probably, I think we just see 17 games of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones completed 65.5% of his passes in his career. Anthony Richardson has completed 50.1% of his passes in his career. I'd rather have Anthony Richardson as my franchise quarterback than Daniel Jones. I think there's more there. I think if things had gone differently for Richardson, he could have been a pretty good NFL quarterback. It just hasn't worked out that way. This shoulder injury, it's the same shoulder injury, by the way. It's not a new injury. So that's pretty troubling when a quarterback has a shoulder injury for like 10 months and it's still the same one. You still can't throw. And then we have Tucker Kraft, which is like Tucker Kraft might just lead the Packers in targets. They have a roster full of wide receiver 3s, the best wide receiver 3s you've ever seen, but no one really dominant. And actually, I'll add one more amendment in there. If we can get Flacco for 10 games and then Shadur is like not horrible when he starts, why can't David Njoku just like literally catch 100 passes and just be awesome? Like I'm pretty sure he can.
David Njoku is the answer for me. Like, I love David Njoku this year. It's such a simple ask where we want tight ends who are the number 1 or number 2 target on their team. It would be shocking if Njoku was not a number 1 or number 2 target. And like you said, if it's Flacco, we have a history and a sample size of Flacco hyper-targeting Njoku and Njoku having big-time production alongside him. So, like, I love Njoku. Every year he seems like a value to me. And when we talk about tight ends, in terms of targets, David Njoku on like a per game basis is top 3 or top 4 over the last 2 years combined. So completely with you on that one. Warren's really interesting. I think Warren is super interesting because I think they're going to manufacture touches for him. And if it's Jones, I think some of these Taysom Hill narratives where can we get Tyler Warren just a few goal line carries? If you can give Tyler Warren 3 rushing touchdowns this year on top of his tight end production, that's enough to really like push him and make him like even more meaningful pick. So I think that's interesting. Tucker Kraft it's like ambiguous target tree, and Tucker Kraft we think is good and he has yak ability. So really interesting names from you. Let's get into it. Round 1, Jamar Chase is off the board. Like I'm assuming he's your wide receiver 1 as well, Davis.
Yeah. You know what's so funny is I like drafting in the first round. If you weren't scared, if we were all not so scared, I think would actually look a lot different. But like honestly, like Justin Jefferson should be projected for the most points in the NFL. I actually don't even really know if it's close. But because Chase is, I mean, I'm not going to not draft Jamar Chase, right? I think that is not what you should do. But Justin Jefferson will probably score the most points at wide receiver this year.
Yeah, I mean Jefferson. It's always interesting. Jefferson is one that he sort of settles in, but you're actually seeing a little variance where he goes off the board. I'll give another shout out to Darren Armani, Fantasy Mojo. He's a must follow on Twitter for you if you're not following him, because he posts a lot of FFPC boards. He posted a board where Jefferson went at like the 109. Like, it's just weird to me to see Jefferson in that range. We have seen some smart people, Sigmund Bloom, for that matter, is on CeeDee Lamb ahead of Justin Jefferson. Do you kind of push back on that one? Like, the argument for Lamb being it should be a much more pass-happy Dallas team. You don't necessarily have a running back who's going to sap a considerable amount of touches, some ambiguity in that room. Lamb has, like Jefferson, a wide receiver 1 season to his name in recent memory. And he also had 183 targets that wide receiver 1 season. Last year, despite Cooper Rush starting quarterback, like, Lamb was still able to survive. Is there an argument for Lamb over Jefferson, or do you sort of just completely push away that narrative?
I mean, there's an argument, but I wouldn't buy it. Like, Jefferson is, of all active players in the NFL, he averages 10 more receiving yards per game just over the entirety of, like, career numbers over everyone else. Chase being number 2, Lamb being number 3. I think what the pushback is that people are unsure if JJ McCarthy is any good. To which I would say, pretty sure he's probably better than Sam Darnold, or the Vikings wouldn't have made that decision, because only $30 million a year or $35 million a year is what Darnold agreed to with the Seahawks, with like a pretty generous to the team out where they can get out of that deal after year 1 pretty easily. The Vikings, if they thought there was any question, like, what did they just won 12 games, right?
Yeah.
13 games. Like,
they were right,
really
and they were
good.
had a chance to win the division, lost to Detroit that week 17 game. It was, yeah, Minnesota really showed a lot of confidence in JJ McCarthy. And I think for us to assume that a organization that gets things right a lot is going to go with a quarterback who's not going to succeed is sort of foolish. And plus, all of the Kevin O'Connell quarterbacks have put up fantasy numbers. Like, we will see Nick Mullins pass for 400 plus in this offense multiple weeks. Josh Dobbs there was Josh Dobbs mania on the waiver wire at one point a couple years back.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, yeah, JJ McCarthy's going to be absolutely fine. So you're Jefferson over Lamb. Let's throw Lamb also into a mix here. Lamb, Nakua, Neighbors, BTJ, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is occasionally going inside of round 2 more and more now. But if that little cluster of wide receivers, if you're trying to execute 0 from the back end of the first round, do one of those wide receivers stand out to you more?
Honestly, no. Like, I think my argument would be all-encompassing, injury risk, team, like, whatever. To me, I think Jefferson and Chase are in a group of their own. And then Lamb, Nakua, St. Brown, Nico, Brian Thomas Jr. To me, you could argue those guys in any order. You could say, oh, I think Neighbors is going to be the wide receiver 1 next year, so I want to have him on every team. Or I think Travis Hunter's going to open things up for Brian Thomas Jr. He's going to be like, I would hear any of it. I have no strong opinions about any of them. I think they're all great, and I think you are in a foundational place to start your team with those guys.
I think all of them are going to score an exceptional amount of fantasy points. I agree with you completely. I would gravitate towards Puka Nacua and Malik Neighbors, just because I think that they could put up absurd target totals, where the wide receiver 1 overall has led the NFL in targets and receptions now for 4 straight seasons. Like, Malik Neighbors was 11 targets a game last year, and Puka Nacua was on pace for 160 targets, had about the same as rookie year. So both of those guys getting into that 190 target range, it wouldn't be shocking at all. I think BTJ getting up to the 170 plus range is a little bit wishful thinking. I think he'll settle into the 150, which I'm not complaining about for a player of his level, certainly not. And Sun God, I think, deserves to be a little bit of more of an early second round pick with some of that turnover in that offense. Let's push it to round 3. Now, let's push it to round 2. Round 2, last time you were on Dynasty Life, you talked about the potential for A.J. Brown, what a great value he is in drafts. He's going alongside Ladd McConkey, Drake London, and then, of course, Nico Collins is routinely available in the early portion of round 2. Currently, he's the 2-4 in these recent 350s. And this is over the course of 20-plus drafts for anybody questioning this ADP. Nico Collins is the highest drafted of these guys, but all 4 of these guys are in like a cluster of 6 ADP spots. Do you have a preferred target here?
I mean, it's definitely AJ Brown. I'm comfortable with any of them. Again, I do think it's rational and reasonable to say after BTJ and Nico to say I actually would prefer Jonathan Taylor. I would prefer Bucky Irving. I would prefer Devin Achane and kind of do that build. Like I think that's totally rational and reasonable. But you can do these crazy, like particularly on FFPC, you could just get these crazy high charged wide receiver starts because McBride will go early sometimes. Bowers goes obviously so early. Like you could do like things could fall a certain way at the tail end, and you could start your draft Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, on the FFPC, and like I don't. That is just crazy. Like that's crazy. Just like you're gonna project for like 37 points out of your wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 every week.
Yeah, we've seen a Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr. start in an FFPC main event already. Like it's incredible the amount of potential you can get with a wide receiver start there. So you're AJ Brown over those guys. I'm probably Drake London there, but I think all of those, like you said, are really strong picks. And again, I agree with you. I like some of those running backs in round 2 as well. Different ways to build your team. Let's push it to round 3. Okay, so let's say you've started out wide receiver, or potentially wide receiver tight end. You want to continue building a very strong 0 RB build. This is where I think it gets interesting because we have wide receivers inside of round 3 with potentially enormous target ceilings. Garrett Wilson, who's a target magnet, Rashee Rice, who was like a usage king to start last year, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who we loses DK Metcalf, loses Tyler Lockett, had 100 catches last year. He's going at the 3-4. Then you've got T. Higgins, who was amazing on a per-game basis last year, 18 points per game in PPR, double-digit touchdowns. Tyreek Hill, who was the number 3 or number 2 overall pick last year. And then you've got Devontae Adams, Marvin Harrison Jr. So round 3 is loaded with potential wide receivers who could take their game to another level or at least give you, let's say, 15 to 17 points per game this year. Is there a wide receiver that stands out to you the most or a few guys you really like in this range?
I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. to me, I mean, Garrett Wilson, I think is just a layup. Like Garrett Wilson might not ever hit his ceiling that we thought he had as a player, but he's definitely going to just be like good this year. But Marvin Harrison Jr., we took him at the 1-2 turn last year. He had like a disappointing rookie year, 850 yards, 8 touchdowns. I mean, a lot of like, I've been doing this research on, or I did this research on other first round rookie wide receivers who kind of disappointed. And like DeAndre Hopkins had 800 yards and 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb had, I think, 900 yards and 3 touchdowns. Devonta Smith, 900 yards, 3, like basically first round rookie wide receivers who are like good and they're starters, but they're not great right away, generally get better. Now, I mean, look, don't get me wrong. You've got your Jahan Dotsons, your Jalen Ragers. I mean, honestly, even your QJs, like Quentin Johnson resurged as a fantasy asset last year, but didn't get any better as a player, really. And I don't think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go that route.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr., I'll give you a shout out. You had a thumbnail where I believe you put Marvin Harrison Jr. and Sam Sulik in the same thumbnail. I thought that was very...
They're jacked.
Yeah, absolutely jacked humans. Who was the third jacked human in that?
Chris Bumstead.
There you go. There you go. Chris Bumstead, Mr. Olympia. That was a very creative thumbnail. But I like Marvin Harrison Jr. You can also get him at the beginning of round 4. I'll say there's a lot of people here at Fantasy Points over the top over Rashee Rice. Garrett Wilson, we've talked about. He's sort of a layup because he's a potential that he could lead the NFL in target share in the 3rd round. And he's a guy that had 100 catches last year. And you're getting this ADP discount. It's been sort of the offseason of Garrett Wilson. Very bullish on him. It's sort of an easy explanation, round 3 guy. I will say, I think I'm bullish on JSN this year. If you want to hear my takes on JSN, go ahead and listen to the School of Scott, where Jacob Gibbs joined Scott Barrett and I sort of made a big bull case argument for JSN. Don't want to take too much time here, but I think he'll be north of 25% target share. I think he'll probably have just as many catches. And with his versatility now in the offense, I think people are looking at that as a negative where he's going to not be a full-time slot player. I think that opens things up for him to have more spike weeks. So I'm into JSN at cost. Let's take this into round 4. Let's say you want to push it and you want to start with 4 straight wide receivers or 1 tight end and 3 straight wide receivers. You've got, now it gets a little hairier. Guys like DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Ted McMillan, Travis Hunter, Xavier Worthy, Mike Evans, and Terry McLaurin. Do one of those names stand out to you? And again, when I reference Travis Hunter, it's where I think he'll be. Right now, you're seeing him more as a 5-6 turn guy. But Davis, we've done this a long time. By the time we get to FFPC min events in August, there's going to be people who don't want to leave their drafts without Travis Hunter. So I throw him into this mix. And I'll go ahead and throw Jameson Williams in there too, Davis, because I think we talked about him on Ship Chasing when I was on. I think he'll continue to rise throughout the summer to like wide receiver 18, 20 land.
Hunter, JMO, Worthy, Evans. I mean, all of them. They're all good. It's so hard for me to take like James Cook and honestly, even like Amari and Hampton. Like I like Amari and Hampton, but it's just like these are guys who are like, I don't even have to squint. I'm like, oh yeah, Mike Evans just scored 13 touchdowns. Oh, Devontae Adams was just still Devontae Adams, but playing in a dome with the best quarterback he's played in since like 2021, Aaron Rodgers. Like it's just so evident. And then Hunter, I mean, dude, like I get it. Oh, he's gonna play defensive. Like if Travis Hunter is the guy that we all think he is, or I mean, he might already be like the smoothest athlete at the, like, you know, he actually really reminds me of CeeDee Lamb, which is not, Lamb is a little bit thicker than he is. I think Lamb's listed weight is 205. Hunter's like 186, I think. But just like how Hunter catches the ball and just transitions to be like going up the field, like in one motion, you can hardly even see him do it. I mean, right now, if you were doing the what do they call it, the big gorillas, the 350s,
Big gorillas.
I would be, and I have a ticket for one, but I just have not had enough time yet. I would be taking him every time, I think, before he gets a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, I think he's super interesting. And like you said, there's multiple wide receivers in this round. This is why it's a lot of fun to do these sort of builds. So the easy part is over here, Davis. We've identified a bunch of wide receivers, a bunch of tight ends, and some quarterbacks. Now we're going to attempt to identify some running backs that can help you recover after passing on them for multiple rounds. Is there a specific kind of running back, like from an archetype type, that you're looking for when you're trying to execute a zero RB approach? Is it youth? Is it upside? Is it pass catching ability? Like, is there a real answer for this? Or is it, I'm just trying to find value where I can in like round 6 and beyond?
I mean, I think kind of the old archetype would have been like Caleb Johnson, like ambiguous backfield, rookie, good spot, all that stuff. But weirdly, I think one of my biggest changes in perception from last year to this year is like, well, James Conner can probably be that guy.
Yeah.
DeAndre Swift can probably be that guy. Isaiah Pacheco can, just like any guy who is, we don't love his workload. He gets some receiving work. They're like kind of vaguely interesting and can just run into 290 touches, which all those guys can. I like, you could totally draft a team right now with DeAndre Swift as your first running back and be like, well, yes, some of the times the way this season is going to play out, I'm going to win.
Yeah, and I'll say that when you bring up Swift, nobody's going to be like, oh my gosh, Davis, you're so creative. What an unbelievable answer.
Right,
But
exactly.
It helps you get off to a quick start. Because I think with DeAndre Swift, like a lot of what we're going to do with zero RB and potentially even some hero RB builds is you're going to end up having to attack running back in like the double-digit rounds. You're going to build running back depth there, sort of in that, like you referenced, round 7 and beyond. And I have a zero RB target list article coming out at Fantasy Points probably this week. It also talks about sort of your hero RB2s in that same sense in the same article. And I'll go through sort of round by round here. But you really hit on something where I can't have all like gut shot straight upside guys. I need a couple of boring guys that can get me off to a good start. And then, of course, you can have those handcuff, the chaos guys, the guys who could potentially overtake a backfield. So Swift is definitely an interesting one. Before we dive into our preferred running backs by each round, let's just take a step back. You mentioned you weren't crazy about round 4, but I think one thing I've seen in some of these modified zero RB builds is drafters drafting the edge pick in rounds 1, 2, 3, attacking running back in round 4, and then returning to edge picks and maybe picking up their RB2 in round 7, 8, 9, whenever. Do you mentioned you don't see the edge in the Omarion Hampton tier, but let's just take it a step further. If you were to attempt to do a modified zero where you anchored or built like a hero RB team from the 4th round, which player stands out to you the most? Omarion Hampton, James Cook, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, and then I'll throw Breece Hall in there because you're seeing Breece Hall falling into round 4 more and more often. It's not every draft, but it's quite often these days.
I mean, Breece is my favorite for sure. Like a guy we were taking in the 1st round last year who just like kind of had some bad luck. The team was worse than expected. They draft Membu, so that has been a problem spot for them, the left side. And honestly, both the tackles have been pretty poor there. And playing with a running quarterback, our gut instinct is that it's a death knell. Like, oh, he's never going to catch the ball again. First is Fields actually checks it down more than the average running quarterback because he scrambles some, but so much of Fields rushing in the NFL has been designed that he actually throws it more to running backs than like a Richardson, for example. But then the other thing is that, and I just looked this up because I just made a video about it. Breece averaged 5.4 yards after contact average on zone gap runs, which is like exactly what you get with Fields. Like basically what that tells me is when it's Breece versus one linebacker in the hole, he's going to win that battle like all the time because he's just kind of too hard to bring down. And generally the research is, I found this in the weirdest place. I found this in a 2018 SB Nation article, the Music City Miracle, the Titans blog, where they did this research about how much yards per carry playing with a running quarterback adds for you. It's about half a yard per carry playing with like a really good running quarterback. So I think it's just like super wheels up for Breece.
I had this conversation with Graham Barfield, and I've gone sort of full circle with Breece, where beginning of the offseason, he was a guy that I thought I could fade. But when you start pushing him into round 4, there's just too many upside scenarios for me to pass up on him in that range, where there's the hit rates for round 4 guys are always not as good as as we think they are. And then when we get into Breece Hall, I had this conversation with Graham Barfield where we broke down each and every team's top 2 targets. We went over all 32 offenses over the course of 2 podcasts in like 3 hours and predicted who would be the number 1 and number 2 target on each team. I keep gravitating back to this could be Breece Hall having an Alvin Kamara like 19, 18% target share season and being the number 2 target on the Jets, where even if Aaron Glenn wants to mix in a Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, it doesn't matter for us because Breece Hall is just going to catch so many passes. And like you said, the efficiency of the run game in New York should improve with Justin Fields behind center and a better offensive line. So I'm sort of with you. I'll take round 4 shots on Breece Hall for better or for worse in that range. Let's get back to it, though. I think more likely if you've executed this strategy, you're going to find your running backs, like you said, round 7. I think a lot of people might play a little bit of chicken and want to dive into rounds 5 or round 6. You're still somewhat fragile, and you could still return to drafting wide receivers. There's plenty of those guys in round 7, round 6. So let's say you decide round 5 is your running back round. Chuba Hubbard, Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey, James Conner, Joe Mixon. Your preferred pick in that round 5 range, currently in FFPC ADP.
It's probably RJ Harvey. And I like taking Dobbins a little bit too, but Harvey is just like, he's kind of everything you ask for. He does the passing game stuff. Weirdly, not a third down back, but still I expect to be fine. And the passing game gives you that crazy explosive athleticism that generally is kind of the hallmark of what we really look for in zero running back stuff. But this whole range, Mixon, Hubbard, Harvey, Kamara, Walker, Travion Henderson, James Conner. Probably not David Montgomery. I probably wouldn't love having David Montgomery as my running back 1, but honestly, these guys can fit a hero running back build or a zero running back build and just like be the only starter you take until the next range of guys, and I am totally comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And in my article, round 5, I believe that Chuba Hubbard, I believe that RJ Harvey and James Conner should be targets if you attempt to build this strategy. Travion Henderson fell into a value category where there's a little bit more risk with him as your RB1, but the upside for him is immense. He's playing next to the running quarterback. He's got elite pass catching ability. So it's a really strong round for running back values there. Round 6 gets to be a little more interesting. You mentioned David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins. So I have 2 rookies and 2 veterans, both going inside of this range. Of course, on Underdog, these guys might be around later, but FFPC, we're talking about round 6 values. Does one of these players stand out for you?
See, this range, I think these dudes are all the same. I don't particularly love or particularly hate any of them. I think it's super flat, and it's the kind of range where I think taking a real clear, like if you're the type of person who's going to do 10 teams or 50 teams or 100 teams, I think you kind of just let the room dictate what you get here, as opposed to being like, oh, I absolutely have to take player X every time.
So for me, I think none of them really stand out. And like you said, all of them sort of have a range of outcomes where they could help you. I'll say Judkins. Judkins for me in round 6, it's a palatable ADP where he's got the draft capital, he's got the bell cow profile. I think Dylan Sampson could end up being an annoying presence in that backfield, but I'll take shots on Judkins inside of round 6. Him as my RB2 in a hero RB build is probably way more appealing than Judkins as my RB1 in a zero RB build. But I do think the volume will be there with him. I think he's athletic. I think he's got the profile. And there's just not enough horses in Cleveland, skill position player wise, that they're not going to try to get at least something out of a guy that used top 40 draft capital for. Let's take it into round 7. This is an interesting one. Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, Isaiah Pacheco. Do any of those players stand out to you, Davis?
So this is where like the difference between FFPC and the best ball rooms change a little bit. I'm just like, man,
you don't want any of them.
I don't.
And pass is appropriate here too.
Fine. Yeah, I like Pollard. Like if Pollard holds on to the role Pollard had last year was quite good, but Tajay Spears, well, Pollard was injured too, but Spears was actually injured, like out for some of those games. And they spent so much of last offseason talking about, oh, we're chopping and changing. No, we got a 1A, we got a 1B, and they can switch per game. Like, if that is truly the case, Pollard will be like a pretty brutal pick. But he's the one I like the most conceptually of that group, because he could have 300 touches. And he was good on a bad Titans team last year. But these guys kind of all feel like this is what the dead zone has now become. This is like that, like Isaiah Pacheco. These guys are dead zoney now.
Yeah, it's very, very dead zoney. I'll have Tony Pollard rank the highest. I agree. I think the others don't really get me excited. Let's start out round 8 with this one. Aaron Jones is going off the board currently as the 6-12. So he's going somewhere at the beginning of the 7th, he's going off the board as the 7-1. So he's sort of at that 6-7 turn. Jordan Mason just sneaks into round 8. Jordan Mason, I had Andrew Erickson on the other day. He made a prediction that Jordan Mason is going to be like this year's Jamal Williams, Raheem Mostert, lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns. It was a bold prediction show, so we got a little bit over the top. But I think that the argument that Jordan Mason takes over the goal line work in what should be a very, very plus offense in Minnesota is there. But you're paying a big-time premium for Mason. Mason last year, of course, had 3 out of the first 4 weeks. He finished as an RB1. He had 9 rushes over 20 yards last year. A great first down rate where I think like 25% of his rush attempts resulted in a first down. Are you in or out on Mason at the 8-12? Because Davis, in a 0 RB build, Mason checks off a lot of boxes. He has the contingent upside behind an older back, and he's going to have a weekly role where you can throw him in there if you get stuck and you want to get double-digit points at your RB2 spot.
Mason feels pretty thin to be like a league winner at that price. Like I made this comment on on ADP chasing last week. Like, good rule of thumb, drafting the most expensive running back too, like every year is probably bad. Like if you just avoided that guy, it was like Blake Corum
Trey Benson
last year.
last year. Trey Benson.
Trey Benson.
Yep.
I don't think David Montgomery counts because like
He's his own position. David Montgomery, like the people like I always include him in the handcuff articles, and people always get so angry. But he technically is a handcuff in this thing of ours because he's the number 2 drafted back, but he sort of has a weekly role. And I'll say during the peak Mike McDaniel era, I mean, I can't believe we're saying that. Mike McDaniel's still there in Miami, but the good old days, Raheem Mostert sort of had his own role, even with the big Devon Achane weeks. So, like, you'll find guys that are quote unquote RB2s, but you're talking about RB2 in like the classical sense, the Jordan Masons, the Zach Charbonnets, those kind of guys.
They just like, don't get me wrong. You run into that nut season, incredible. I mean, Ken Walker turns his ankle, you have Zach Charbonnet, you win, but that should correspond to their price. And like Jordan Mason, I think, well, it's funny at this price, Jordan Mason could score 12 touchdowns and be a bad pick. Like you could be like, oh, dude, Jordan Mason, he gave me a bunch of 12-point weeks. Aaron Jones stayed healthy, caught a bunch of passes, and I still wasn't that stoked. I still like Mason in underdog because he's kind of available there. Like a lot of times when you're taking quarterbacks, he's like in between Bo Nix and Brock Purdy and ADP, like that rough range. And like, let's say I already have one quarterback, or maybe I took Josh Allen and I don't want to take another quarterback here and I'm behind at running back. Then I like him there. I like him less in managed on the FFPC just because I likely am needing other guys where he's at.
Okay, let's keep it going in round 8. Just sort of a yes or no. Are you in or out on Jalen Warren and Brian Robinson inside of round 8?
Out.
Out on both. Okay, so let's take it into round 9 and beyond. Round 9's interesting because you're seeing Travis Etienne and Bashal Tutin going inside of round 9. You're also seeing Tyrone Tracy consistently drafted here, and he's going behind Cam Skattebo. The gap is closed a little bit. And then you've got Dallas, where Javonte Williams is the first Cowboys running back off the board. And then we'll throw Zach Charbonnet in the mix, a high-end handcuff. See, these ambiguous backfields, is there a Jacksonville Jaguars back, a New York Giants back, and a Dallas Cowboys back that you prefer at cost right now?
Yeah, frankly, I like Bigsby the most. Probably.
Oh, well, I love that
what?
one. I love that
I
one.
like the cheapest one, and I don't even love Bigsby the player. I think Tutin's way better than him. Honestly, I think an efficient market would have ETN like a 10th round pick and Tutin and Bigsby like 12th round picks each, like almost like back to back in ADP. I think efficient pricing for the Dallas backfield would actually have Blue be the most expensive, then Sanders. Sanders 40 spots higher, Williams 40 spots cheaper, but you don't get to draft. You don't get to draft in an efficient market, and in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's bad because it means that if you do actually want to try and approximate efficient exposures to that backfield, you have to pay some bad prices. Like I've taken Javonte a couple times. I've taken Etienne a couple times. It never feels good.
No.
But I also like those backfields, and I don't want it to be a situation where all my bets are on Bashal Tutin, and I was right that the backfield had all these points in, but I was wrong that I was wrong on the guy.
I'll say that Jacksonville is the one where, like, Dallas necessarily investing in the Dallas backfield, I don't think it's something where you have to do it this year. Let somebody else in your league figure that out. And I do like attacking the Jacksonville backfield, though, because Liam Cohen last year, he had 2 running backs in design targets in the backfield, like Rashad White and Bucky Irving over at Fantasy Points Data were both top 5 in design targets. That's been a little bit of a staple in the Liam Cohen offense, where I think that one of these guys is going to exceed our expectations as a pass catcher. ETN on paper would be the one to do it, but Tutin, I like having exposure to him. I think, like you said, if you're a volume drafter, I want to have sort of the most Tutin. And I love your Bigsby call. He was really efficient as a runner last year, like way more efficient than ETN was over the last 2 years as a runner. Bigsby's still young. He was a day 2 pick. There's a lot to like with Bigsby as sort of the cheap Jacksonville Jaguars running back. And if you miss on him, he's significantly cheaper. Do you have a pick between Cam Scatterbu and Tyrone Tracy?
Slight lean on Scatterbu because he's like bigger.
Yeah.
But this is like a total
Pass.
Devin Singletary cool. It's Devin Singletary Kool-Aid man situation. Like, I don't know. And it also feels like they're complementary enough that they could be a total 50-50. Like Tracy gets some stuff, Scatterbu gets some stuff, and it is not all that predictable. And they're also going to be bad.
Yeah, that is a good argument against taking one of those running backs. I worry. I think that they want it to be a little bit more of a split backfield too. You could end up with a split backfield in a bad offense. Just draft Malik Neighbors on New York and sort of pass on everybody else. I think that's a good draft strategy this year. Tracy, I'll take some shots on because he's cheaper. I've drafted some Scatterbu as well. I think that the one out for Scatterbu getting an outsized role is Tracy put the ball on the ground a lot last year. Dable has to be coaching for his life a little bit. I know some people think, Dable, he's a little safer than you think. But if the guy gets off to one of these horrendous starts, he gets completely steamrolled in game one like he has in back-to-back years, there's going to be a lot of heat on him. So Tyrone Tracy fumbling the ball, him going to the more less turnover-prone Scatterbu might make a little bit of sense. But again, I worry a lot about that backfield. Davis, got to get you out of here. Throw in a couple of your double-digit round running back targets.
Well, Miles Sanders and Bigsby are the top ones. I'm big on Ray Davis. I think he can kind of become a Montgomery to Cooks's Gibbs in a way. I really and you know what? Actually, here's the one that nothing even has to happen, and we'll look back on it. It'll be so obvious. Jalen Wright. If the Miami Dolphins offense is 2022, 2023, Tua stays healthy, the line just plays like the line is the 19th best offensive line in the NFL, not the worst. A-Chain is a little bit more efficient in his 2023 role. It's like that's where you would actually want him. And Wright is well, I was going to say he's the biggest guy in the backfield. He's not anymore because they drafted Ollie Gordon. And maybe it'll be Ollie Gordon, but I think Jalen Wright can really just kind of be the Mostert. And I just feel like that's not being priced in at his ADP at all. He's being priced like a pure contingent value guy.
Ray Davis is definitely one of mine. I've drafted a ton of Ray Davis. I agree with you. I think he can carve out a role here. And also, if you have the outside chance that James Cook holds out or sort of quiet quitting, this is, if they don't want to reward him with a contract, you could end up seeing Ray Davis with 4 or 5 starts this year. And I think he would perform somewhere at a mid-level RB2 level. I think he would be a really, really fun player for 0 RB. DJ Giddens as a direct handcuff running back. Giddens is, I love Giddens, and Jonathan Taylor. I know you and Pete Overzet were very bullish on Taylor at cost, but Taylor misses time every single year. Giddens has high-level athleticism, can handle volume, was really productive as a collegiate, and there was some buzz with him with those Colts beat reporters where they say Giddens sort of handles himself like a starter and is a guy with a lot of confidence and the coaching staff believes in. So I don't think he's going to take away from Taylor, but I think if Taylor were to go down, he'd be a guy that gets 20-plus touches every single game with some juice. Davis, this was a lot of fun. Kept you a little too long. Let everybody know once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can get all of my work over at youtube.com/Davis_Mattek, and then all of my written stuff, rankings, dynasty rankings, literally everything. And then at patreon.com/Davis Mattek, and subscribers to both of those have access to the premium Discord full of like-minded individuals.
Yeah, check out all of Davis's work. Jared Smola from Draft Sharks is going to be joining Scott and I on School of Scott this week. Matt Kelly is going to be joining me on Dynasty Life. We have a loaded week here over at Fantasy Points. Stick with us here at Fantasy Football Daily. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.